So my skeptical mind, and that's just who I am. My skeptical mind goes to, well, yeah, of course, you've got this guy over here that's logical and reasonable, and you got this guy over here that's wearing a tinfoil hat. Of course, the tinfoil hat guy's gonna see a lot of stuff, right? He's like imagining it, or he's watched one too many sci-fi movies.
But it can be used to help us frame hypotheses for UFO propulsion, power, stealth, weaponry.
Everything that we experience is very positive.
Sometimes the field of ufology has a short memory span.
We didn't know anything about the $22 million back then. We just kind of thought, well, this is, and I think that was the reason why they were looking for military-type people.
All right. This is Erica Lukes. This is Friday evening. I'm here in Salt Lake City. Welcome to UFO Classified. I love being here every Friday and spending it with all of you. I have been learning so much. You have no idea. In fact, I just found quite an interesting letter from Kehoe in the Androphil files. And in fact, I'm still going to try to pick my jaw up off the floor after reading what I just found. I'm going to be doing a little bit more research on this and then getting information out about what I read this evening. So I hope all of you are safe and sound. I want to thank all of the people that support my show and help keep me on the air and help me archive and do things. I really, really appreciate it. And some of you are in chat tonight. I want to give a big thanks to Northern UFOs, Mario. I'm glad you had a great birthday. And I want to thank Steve and Bill, everybody. You guys rock. As you know, this has been an interesting experience for me, and I'm very candid about my experiences and the things that I've learned, and I will be right, I will be wrong. This is a growing process for me, and I appreciate the fact that all of you that listen to the show are going through the same process. This isn't an easy subject to navigate, and that is why we have to learn from history and move forward instead of believing in some of the things that we are being fed, spoon-fed, which is, again, just another disservice to all of the work that people like my guest this evening have contributed to the subject. I am doing part 2 with Jan Aldrich. He was born in 1944 April, so his birthday is coming up. He has a BA in history from the University College, University of Maryland. He was with the U.S. Army for 25 years in field artillery, 7 overseas tours. He has 16 years experience in meteorology and spent the remaining time in intelligence, personnel, and safety positions. He started Project 1947. He has worked with QFOS, the Fund for UFO Research, MUFON, and has done a great service for all of us in the historical preservation of the subject, and then sharing and mentoring people like myself, which is very important, like I said, if we're going to move forward with the subject. So, Jan, I'm just happy that you're back again. I got so much feedback on last week's show because people just, they want to know. And there are some, as you mentioned before we started the show, there are people that I look up to that have written incredible books and that have spent time in the National Archives and who were listening to your last week's show and hopefully tonight's show. And so that's just such a thrill to know, people like Keith Chester and others are out there paying attention to what you have to say, because you're amazing.
Oh, thank you. So during this last week, one of the things I've been doing is trying to come up with a listing of UFO projects, side projects, things like that. It's really something that went on for almost 70 years now, and we keep making discoveries. And like I commented last week, Robert Todd said he thinks there's thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of documents within the National Archives that we have never dug out, and it's a great resource, and it hasn't really been used.
And I just have to give a little background about Robert Todd for people who are just catching the show that didn't catch last week. But Robert Todd was somebody that was very prolific with the FOIAs that he did, and the research that he did, correct?
Oh, yes, he did hundreds and hundreds of them. And he was sort of known as a crotchety old man. But he, I'm looking at his total output. He started off always as respectful, but when officials started giving him a hard time, he gave it back just as much as he got. So I think one time Richard Hall, Air Force officer, Richard visited the Pentagon, and the Air Force officer came, "Can you do something about this Robert Todd? He's giving us all kinds of grief about things." And Richard he had felt some of Todd's let's say he had been on the rather side where he caught some grief from Todd. So he said, "I don't think there's anything anybody can do about this person."
And that is really that's interesting. And I've heard stories. Both you and Barry have said things over the years about that, and it is in his personality. And he sacrificed a lot and was a very controversial figure in the subject. Yes, he was. But he uncovered a lot of things that we hadn't even suspected at the time. And the extent of what he's uncovered hasn't really reached ufology. It's hundreds of post Blue Book cases, and he got the 4602nd Air Intelligence Service Squadron cases, which were from 53 to 56. He got those transported to the archive, so he's people don't realize the work that he has done without much support. The work he had done to improve ufology. Well, and I think, that goes to show that there are a lot of people behind the scenes that have contributed so much, and they just don't get recognition, and they're not striving for recognition from the mainstream. They're doing this because they love the subject and they have a passion, but it's important to recognize them.
Yes, I don't think he'll ever be recognized for all his contributions. It's just because he was sort of a pariah in ufology. He wasn't at all happy with Roswell, and he let people know it. And that's almost a sin in ufology.
Well, the ufology scene is quite special, as we know, and we've talked about on multiple shows. And I find that, it's interesting. And I wanted to ask you, before we get into some of the meat and the potatoes and the things that you wanted to continue to talk about, I wanted to ask you the difference between American ufology and European ufology. mention to you again before we went on the show that I've been reading the International UFO Reporter, and there was a really a great article in there, a couple articles from the March-April 1989 issue where they were talking about the differences and these, the European faction and the United States faction is kind of going back and forth about things.
Yeah, I think there is I think the Europeans, generally, not everyone, are more skeptical than the Americans. And they're into this psychological and psychosocial ideas of explaining UFOs more than in the United States. I think if you look at the Swedes and the Italians, they are more thorough than a lot of the American organizations. Of course, AFU is trying to preserve all this material, but they also do investigations and everything, and the amount of material that's online because of them is huge. In fact, where do you find British ufology? You have to go to Sweden.
Well, that is interesting. Why? I mean, AFU has been doing this since the early 70s, right?
At least, yes. I think it was even before there was AFU. They were collecting and storing material and cataloging it.
And this was the Swedes.
The Swedes, yeah.
And so, who was involved in that? Who is involved in that?
Anders Lirgen. He is he's one of the main. What could we say that carries the work forward? They have a number of people that they have storage places that they have used in their basements and places like that, where they have stored huge amounts of material, scrapbooks. They have the official Swedish, not only the UFO, the previous mystery objects in the sky, the ghost rockets. They have the government material on this, or let's put it this way, a good part of the government material on these have been released to them. So they have a much clearer idea of what the Swedish government had been doing for UFOs than the U.S. Ghost rockets, 1946, well, there were actually things in 1945. In fact, they had an observer corps out to, because Sweden was neutral, they had observer corps out looking for violations, and they would force down both Allied and Nazi planes and inter the crews. But they also reported in the Second World War a number of unusual sightings. And Andrews kindly translated the material for World War II. After the war, 1946, ghost rockets. And they started off, and everybody thought they were the Soviets, and it was they went ahead and started just like a UFO project a year before there were any UFOs. So Sweden and Scandinavian countries and Finland had all these reports and everything, and so they had a project to keep track of them and to analyze them and things like that. 1947, UFOs came along. These guys already had experience with the ghost rockets, and they were able to carry right on into UFOs. It was so. These people have quite a bit more experience with aerial phenomena than most other countries. Now, there supposedly were ghost rocket projects in Belgium, Italy, and France. At least they were collecting these things, maybe not doing so much work on them. But I have a whole series of reports that the Italians gathered in Sweden. Swedish government pronouncements and sightings, which the Foreign Office there collected, and the British were involved in that too.
And so, what were the relations like between Sweden and the United States of America during that time frame?
Well, only a few people knew this, but the Swedes had already told high-ranking Americans, like maybe cabinet positions, that if there was going to be a war with the Soviet Union, they were on the west side. Now, as far as the ghost rockets go, I have Navy, Air Force, State Department, other forerunners of the Central Intelligence Agency, the SSU, and the Central Intelligence Group. So I have from the archives, I got about 120 documents. And this is one of the things that I've actually been able to do, which is probably what the Europeans would say, hey, you should do this on everything. You guys are over there swapping tales about old cases that you already know are hoaxes, and you're not doing any actual work. So I said, I have 100 and about 120 ghost rocket documents, all the way from unclassified to top secret, or formerly top secret. Let's put it that way. Going through these documents, you find references to other documents. So now we have about 110 references to other documents that may contain ghost rocket material. And this is all, like I say, the same agencies that I have material from. It just references other stuff that hasn't been collected from the archives. I found a lot of Navy. The Navy was kind of interested in this pretty much, and at the archives, there's not many Navy documents, but there's a lot on the ghost rockets within the documents that are there. They still have a lot of Navy documents to find. And, of course, that 110 documents that I referred to, that doesn't count for the ones we haven't found yet.
And so why is the Navy typically, why are they the ones that are mentioned as really paying attention to things like that? We see that currently as well.
I think the Navy is, like they say in Britain, it's the silent service. It doesn't put out too much information. It keeps everything close to they keep everything close to their chest, and they do not They do not talk about things like the Air Force did with UFOs. Of course, the Air Force got the official orders to take care of this. Actually, in the beginning, the very beginning, all three services were supposed to be involved, and the Air Force was the lead agency. But pretty soon, the Air Force managed to take over most of the operations for themselves. And the whole business with documents is the Navy, hardly ever admits anything. If you do a FOIA, they say no record. Yeah, right. Okay. Except that's not true. I'd like to comment on the Italians. So the Italians are 10 years ahead of anything we're doing in the United States. They're always 10 years ahead. If you look at ufology, if it's like climbing a mountain, the Italians are already at the summit. We're still trudging up the sides. Early on, when all the electronics came in, like digital scanning and digitizing records, all the Italians in the Italian UFO organization, they all decided they were all going to get the same equipment, so it was all compatible. And one of the things they were going to do is scan their material and centralize it. So clippings, official documents, anything else they could find, investigations, is all centralized. And even more than that, or more than the U.S., they were able to get the official documents released, and they were able to trace down documents that got caught up in the bureaucratic maze of the government. And they were able to trace these down. And it was like we have an organization, the mission of the organization, everybody understands, and they all work to try to fulfill that mission. The United States, it's the lone wolves, it's jokesters, hoaxers, and so most of the a lot of the progress is in spite of people in ufology instead of because of.
And yeah, I mean, and all that is, it's just so fascinating. And so thank you for, I appreciate you talking a little bit about that. And when you are looking to Italy, who are some of the prominent researchers that have contributed in Italy? Because again, we don't hear a lot about people in Europe, because we're so caught up with this mayhem and the blue avions and all of this nonsense that takes place in America. We don't really look over there, which is a mistake.
Well, Eduardo Russo is one of the main people over there, and he's like the leading light in Italy. But there's others in Switzerland and in Italy, and when we had the UFO history workshop, the Italians came over and joined our sign historical group. So they were represented, and of course the French were there. Weinstein was there, and Jean-Jacques Valesco. So the problem with the French, as the French will tell you, is very little official material is available. the French Air Force, and to a certain extent the Navy and the Army, release very little of this material. Now the Gendarmerie a lot of their material has been released, and they investigate civilian UFO material. So if a civilian sees something, the national police are sent to investigate the sighting and record it. So this material has been pretty much released. But things about there were 2 or 3 articles in French Air Force magazine in the early days that had rather interesting cases from all over the world. Of course, France had a large colonial presence in Africa and Oceania and other places. So there's some of that, but most of the official material has not. Even though one of the French, the Ministry of Defense, he said that this is an important subject to go ahead and investigate. The amount of cases that leaked out are very few as far as official French material.
And so I want to go back just for a minute, because this is just really interesting information, but to talk a little bit about the Sign Historical Group and the meeting that you had. When was that?
Well, that was in Chicago at the and Kehoe set that up for us, but it was actually paid for by the coalition, or the Fund for UFO Research paid for most of that. Just a second, I got something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have the proceedings here, which are also available for free on the archives, the archives, on my site. If you click to the Sign Historical Group, the proceedings of the history workshop are on there for everybody to read, and it's dated. I mean, it was 1990s. It's dated, but we have a lot of material not on Project 47, which is efforts of the Sign Historical Group gathering material and interviews and things like that. Also, people's collections. This too is dated, but there are a lot of interesting articles like UFO investigations in Italy, New Zealand, and a number of countries around the world. There's a section called "Finding Treasures in the Archives."
Oh, that's
Tips and
cool.
Research by a man named John Neff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a general article about the archives, but it has a lot of application to UFO research. Library of Congress, of course, is another place that the resources have not been fully utilized. And not just back to other eras like the First World War and things like that. There's even material there. Maxwell Air Force Base, we have an article about there. So if you wanted to do research, you could get an idea of where the records are and what to look for if you look at the proceedings. You just go to Project 47 and there's a thing that says Sign Historical Group.
And I'm actually looking at that right now, and I'm looking at the collections section, and I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about the Donald Kehoe archives.
Well, the Donald Kehoe archives are no longer available to the public. Richard Hall sold those on his. Well, he actually, took an advance on, and they ended up in private hands. So.
And do we know whose hands?
Yes. Rod Dyke in Washington State, and I've extensively copied from that before they were transferred. That was down at Dick Hall's house for about 2 weeks when Project 1947 happened, so I was able to copy a lot of the material there. There is still, a lot of things that Dick had which were unique. And we talked about the end of NICAP and how they tried to copy a lot of things because they were afraid that certain things would be lost. So they copied a lot of material. Dick also was the foreign representative for MUFON, so he got all the cases from overseas. So that was in the archives, and he all during his lifetime he collected UFO reports. So he had his own collection, of course.
How fascinating! And so there's no. So you I'm glad that you got to copy some of the things that you copied. But is anybody? Can they talk to the person that has all of this? Because from what I understand, the person in Washington State has quite a considerable holding.
Yes, he's got his own holdings, which are huge, and it's another giant collection that nobody really knows what's in it. Occasionally, I send him requests for things that, and he usually passes them along to me. The head of the astronomy, amateur astronomers in Colorado, in Denver. Why am I having a blank on his name? Anyways, he was writing to Kehoe before NICAP ever existed. And one of the things he said is, I've got this letter from Hynek. This is about 1953-54. He wants us to send him any UFO reports we come across here in Colorado. And I told him no, because he said Hynek will just give them to the Air Force and then the reports will be ridiculed. And so I'm not doing that. So, so he wouldn't cooperate. But other people, other astronomers, amateur astronomers, and Ground Observer Corps did cooperate him because Hynek was an actual Blue Book official. So the Ground Observer Corps, some some stations did cooperate with Hynek. And let's see, J.U. Pruitt is a meteor tracer in the northwest up there. He did cooperate with Hynek, and Lincoln not Lincoln LaPlause. Clyde Tombaugh also sent him material. So.
And so I have to ask you too, because in some of my reading of the files, it sounds like, with regard to James McDonald, that after his passing, there was a considerable effort by certain researchers and organizations to get access to all of his files from Betsy McDonald. What can you tell us about that?
Well, you know the story about that. That's Ann Druffel put together his files in order. I mean, McDonald was pretty systematic anyways, but she got his files and put them in order, and they went to the University of Arizona. Now, we went out there with a group of people and copied a lot of material, but McDonald's files are so huge that we didn't get all, certainly did not get all. We got extensive material, but not all of it. There's a lot of material in his files. Other people have visited University of Arizona and also have large amounts of files that they took, copies of. McDonald's files are just a wonderful resource. So much material in there, and he contacted so many people and followed up on the UFO sightings, not just from official sources, but from newspapers and referred people. So there's huge amounts of material that he used. Lauren Gross's books, he was one of the people that went with us. He used a lot of McDonald's material in his books, and then he he'd do a book on, like parts of a year, like say 1947 he did, and then in 1950 there were so many UFO sightings, so he had like from January to May, and then he'd have June, and then he'd have the first couple of days of July, and then some cases just 2 or 3 days. And he made use of huge amounts of McDonald's material in writing his books, UFO History, which he later changed the title to Fifth Horseman of the Apocalypse, a comment by Lincoln LaPlause about what UFOs were.
And that is fascinating, and thanks to Barry Greenwood, I have those in my collection, and it's incredible to read. And so with regard to McDonald, I mean, that what a fascinating life, and what an interesting. I mean, there were so many intersections that he had, and I think with his wife's involvement with the Black Panthers and different things that were taking place, that was he lived a very colorful life, and obviously it was cut short, way too soon. But do with regard to Arizona and things, ending up there, and people APRO and different investigators or researchers that would want to take things there, can you give us any more information about people that might have done that?
No, I don't think so. Betsy McDonald pretty well held on to his material, and then of course Ann, like I said, put it in order. And so, I mean, I did talk to Ann when she was putting it in order, and I was looking for 1947 things, and she said, well, I'll just send them to you. I said, no, please don't do that. Keep the collection together. If you can send me some copies. Of course, they were terrible copies.
Oh, Ann.
No, but it wasn't her fault. It was the original material and
right.
The way that they used to make copies of newspapers and things like that. So,
well, and I have to say that looking over the holdings that I have with regard to McDonald, I mean, it's his writing. I'm still trying to figure out how to read his writing.
Yeah, Richard Hall said he could translate. So if I had something I wanted to read and I couldn't read his scrawl, then he would try to translate it for me. Dick Hall said he had every kind of McDonald communication. In other words, scratch paper, typewritten communications. So he had probably the biggest collection of McDonald's material, or the Kehoe Archives did, of the McDonald material outside of Arizona. And of course, there is probably a lot of stuff that is not in the archives that he had. He also had Blocher's correspondence with McDonald, and Isabel Davis's correspondence with McDonald. And these guys, sometimes they would write 3 letters to McDonald in a day, 3 or 4 letters on various topics. And McDonald was, he would answer all of them. So a lot of this is, of course, in the McDonald files, but I think Isabel and Ted's material is probably things that McDonald might not be at Arizona. Ted did a lot of material with sightings. He would send McDonald sightings, and McDonald would analyze them and follow up on things, and then he would send Ted a letter. And the intention was a letter and also a follow-up on the sighting. The intention was that the material on the sighting was supposed to go into the NICAP files. I mean, it generally did, but there's still material that's out. McDonald helped Ted with the 1947 book. He went and contacted a lot of the witnesses and re-interviewed them, found out interesting things. Material fell into his hands on 1947. And later, they started 1950. They were doing the same kind of thing they did in 1947 with 1950. So one of the copies I took is about a 50-page manuscript on 1950 sightings, and McDonald's looking into them, and he was looking into them until he died.
And what were some of what did people at NICAP think about McDonald? I mean, I know that Gordon Lohr and the other people in Ann, I mean, they were they really appreciated him and understood how important he was. And in looking at the correspondence that I've seen between all of them, I mean, they had they were very fond and respectful of each other. But what do you think? I mean, how did Kehoe view McDonald?
Well, I think his interaction, I mean, his correspondence is kind of sparse. I mean, compared to to Ted and Isabel and Richard Hall, but I'm thinking that, of course, I think Isabel thought he was the absolute greatest, and Ted just, Ted was like McDonald. I mean, he just tremendous amounts of output and sending it to McDonald, and McDonald digesting it and sending things back. And then Dick Hall was his good friend. I will say that. So my little interactions with him was not that much, but I appreciated his scientific work on the whole subject. When we talked to Durant, Frederick Durant, who was on the Robertson panel and recorded the Robertson panel, and McDonald was very cross with Durant. He was telling him that this subject should have never been debunked. It should have been studied much more thoroughly. And Durant said, I felt like I was feeling a fury of a hurricane coming at me. And I told Durant, I says, well, he considered you a peer, an equal. So he didn't have, if he had something to say to an equal, and he was quite cross with you, I guess, he would let him have it. He didn't hold back. I said, now me, I was just a college student. So to me, when he had any interaction with me, it was more pedagogical. He didn't if I said something stupid, he didn't say, oh, you're stupid. No, he tried to explain why what I had said was incorrect.
That's amazing. And I have to ask you too, because now that I'm looking at this list of the different archives, I'm curious about a couple of things, and the George Hunt Williamson papers is one of them.
Those are well, George Hunt Williamson, quite frankly, was a nut.
Well,
and he had all kinds of weird archaeological ideas too. However, the papers have a lot of interesting things. Williamson collected see, now this is where I'm having this, drawing this blank. Not the Amish, but the Mennonites. The Mennonites had an extensive newspaper network, and they collected a lot of UFO reports. They didn't share it with the outside world because that's the way they were. They would, they didn't. But Williamson's collection has a large number of these Mennonite UFO sightings, and they're investigated by the journalists, their own journalist, and almost nobody had seen these UFO cases because the Mennonites were people that didn't want to mix with the general population. They wanted to keep to themselves. That's why they came to America. So that's a really good thing. He was an associate of a more right-wing guy that put out a newspaper, and George Hunt Williamson wrote columns for it. In fact, I was looking for one of the columns, and I found it. It didn't have any more useful information, but it was a missing article, and it was in this far right-wing magazine.
And do you remember what's more specifics on it?
Well, it was, I hate to say it was racist, but it was Nazis, let's put it that way. I think it was, a fascist. It was a fascist thing. Since I was only looking for this one article, I didn't do a big research on it. Swords had a number of the magazine, and I forget what it was. And I don't remember who it was.
Okay.
The Afri News, she had some business with him. George Hunt Williamson wrote UFO articles for the magazine. They were not that useful to ufology. What I was looking for was the 1951 Kilimanjaro sighting from a airliner, which was filmed. And Williamson had no more than the actual information in the newspapers. He didn't have anything special to say. That was one of our 10 most wanted articles. And when we got it, it contained no new useful information. Ann's material may have some of that about the February 1951 Kilimanjaro sighting.
Okay.
Because Ida Bell Epperson had that's how we found out that Frank Edwards ended up with the film.
You know what? Now that you're mentioning that, I do recall that I might have seen a file on that, and so I will definitely look. Yeah,
that's when the film went to the one of the rather colorful characters in early ufology, and Frankie Strange.
Well,
yeah, Edwards' wife wanted to sell the material right off. She wanted to get rid of it and get some money for it, and people were pleading with her, NICAP and everywhere else, to sell it to them, and she sold it to Strange, and then we find out that maybe the Kilimanjaro film is in Strange's thing, and his widow is reluctant to let anybody look at it. She let Jamie Foxx look at it, but he was looking for just one thing, so and I didn't know that he had found the widow, so I couldn't have asked him to look for this other stuff.
Oh, that's amazing. And we're going to go to break here in a few minutes, but I wanted to ask you too, because now I'm looking at this and my mind is just going a million miles a minute, but the John Fuller files, tell us about that, because he has been somebody that has really been on my mind because of the books that he has written, and one of them is about Dugway, the day we bombed Utah.
Right. So I think it's at BC. Fuller's papers are at BC, and you can only copy 400 during a lifetime. It's one of those restrictions that some colleges and organizations put on copying their material. But most of the UFO material that Fuller had is at NICAP. It's
okay.
interfiled in the case files at NICAP.
And so how would anybody get access to that, or could we?
To BC?
To the fuller files at NICAP.
Oh, they're just, I think Barry has probably copied them all. But he went to BC and did the maximum amount of copies he could do. On the incident at Exeter, he had, Dick Hall probably had more files than Boston College did. So, and so those are in the NICAP files. So they're they're pretty well covered. You can make appointments to go to BC. You have to make appointments in advance, and you have to abide by their 400 copy limit. I don't think they'd have anything about the Dugway book.
Okay, well, he wrote several. My gosh, more than a dozen books that are quite interesting, and obviously with the Betty and Barney Hill, Uninterrupted Journey, and things like that. But there is the Day of St. Anthony's Fire, which is a book that I find fascinating, and then Aliens in the Sky, the new UFO Battle of Scientists. And also Fever, the Hunt for a New Killer Virus. So he had a really interesting, he wrote on a very interesting, it wasn't just UFOs, which is why I'm fascinated by him.
Let me tell you a real short story. My friend J.J. Kibble from Australia, he came to the United States to visit. And I couldn't see him then because I was overseas. But he's going back towards Australia, and he stopped off in Hawaii. He's sitting on the beach, and he's got a copy of Incident at Exeter. And the guy next to him says, "That's my book." And Kibble said, "What?" "Yeah, I'm John Fuller." How about that for just coincidence?
Wow. I mean, seriously, what are the chances? But then again, I will say that I've had some crazy experiences like that. In fact, yesterday I had a client come into the studio who was on the Nimitz. And then a year ago I had somebody that came into the studio who was best friends with one of the Shermans from Skinwalker Ranch fame, from the daughter, and it's just like, how this is so strange, just the randomness and coolness of all of this. But that must have been pretty amazing. I hope you got him to autograph the book.
Oh yeah, and they had a big, and Kibble used to send me recordings of what he was doing. So it was interesting, and it was it was a lot of things about Fuller, and I knew John Fuller myself, so.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get into the people that we didn't get to bring up last week. So we're going to take a break, and you can go get some water or whatever you need to do. And I want to just thank Jan for being here and gracing us with his knowledge. This is so important for all of us. And like I say, the history, if we keep repeating the same mistakes, we're never going to learn and move forward. And Jan and Barry and Gordon are all people that can help us learn from history, and I appreciate that. Thank you to all of the people that are supporting the show. You can go to UFOclassified.com to become a Patreon, and I want to give a shout out to Scott Brown from In the Field, who does beautiful graphics for me, so I appreciate that. We are going to take a break, and we will be back. All right, welcome back to UFO Classified. I am your host, Erica Lukes, and I am very honored to be here every Friday night with all of you. You can catch my podcast on Apple, on iTunes, Amazon. I'm starting to get it out there more, which is great. And again, I want to thank all of the people that support my show. I couldn't do this without you. And right now we are almost to the point where we are covering costs for the show, which is fantastic. And then we can work on the archiving and things. This is just such a fascinating process for me, and I really spend more time on this than I do a business, my full-time job, but I love it. I'm so passionate about it. I know the people that come in here every Friday have the same feeling that I do. I've learned so much about myself and about other people and about the world. It's just been a fascinating journey. So thank you for sharing that with me. I am here tonight with Jan Aldrich, who has done a considerable amount for the historical preservation of the subject, which, as I mentioned a lot, and I mentioned before we went to break, it's really critical that we look back at the history, that we understand some of the people that were working behind the scenes to help us preserve that, because it is so easy, especially now with the way we have social media and the internet. You can find stories that are absolute garbage, within 2 seconds, and then that's leading you down a very unproductive and almost dangerous path, and it further away from the truth. So this is where the truth is. The truth is in the history. Now, how do we move forward from that and instill a sense of fascination and in a younger generation? This is so cool. But anyway, thank you, Jan. Thanks for being back on the show. You really, I love talking to you, and that I could talk to you and Barry for days and days and days and days on end.
Right. Right. So, I was telling you about what I was working on this last week or so, and this is interesting, and I've got some notes here, just a few things that I found, or maybe more than a few things. People that are interested might want to take notes or listen to this program again afterwards. I'm looking for really significant incidents that are hidden away somewhere in the files, or investigations that are not well known, and we don't know where their files are. So, let's start off about 1952. The Secretary of the Navy, Finletter, and Admiral, I'm really going to forget the name of Admiral Radford. Boy, I'm terrible. All right. So they're both on separate planes. They did this so that if one plane went down, the major UFO, not UFO, the heads of the departments did not go down on one plane. So they're flying about 1,000 miles apart across the Pacific from Guam to Hawaii. And the UFOs come and buzz the plane that Admiral Radford's on and circle it and speed off, and then come to Finletter's plane and do the same thing to his. And the two pilots on the two different aircrafts figured out how fast the UFOs had to go, and it was in the thousands of miles an hour. So that was amazing. Now, Finletter and Radford did not see the UFOs. They were only told that they were out there by their pilots. This was in February, when Finletter got back to the United States, he ordered the Office of Naval Research to begin a UFO project. Of course, the Air Force didn't like that, though, so they squawked. I don't know the exact date that the UFO project was stopped, but Arthur Lindell, first he was the head of the Navy photo analysis group, and that was moved to the CIA, so he was head of that, and he's the one that found the Cuban missiles. So he was at the outbriefing. He thinks it was 54 when the outbriefing was. So we have no information from the Navy UFO investigation in the 50s. We don't know anything about it. So that's always been a question mark, and that's what this whole thing, items I'm talking about, that's what this is all about. Interesting enough, December 1952, there's a UFO sighting in French U.S. Air Base in Morocco. What's interesting about this sighting is a Project Blue Book report on it, but on the French UFO site, there's an account from a French airman that was at the air base, and it's the same account. So it's two different things from each one. I thought that was significant, and you should look into that a little more. Moving ahead a little bit, 1954, the Secretary of the Air Force, name was Talbot, he was in an aircraft on the West Coast, and he saw UFOs. And he told the pilot to move closer so he could see it, get a better view. This has been denied. The source of this story is Captain Ruppelt, Edward J. Ruppelt, who had been the head of Project Blue Book 51 to 53. So it has some interest into finding out if this is real or not. Going back to 52, one of the top very secretive organizations within the Air Force, within the headquarters of Air Force Intelligence, was called the Special Study Group, and we talked a little bit about him. The head of that is Stephen Poseny. He, in 1952, with a senior member of the study group, went to Europe to find out about UFOs in Europe. That document that he wrote up when he returned is unavailable. They haven't let us have that. They've let us have portions of the special study group files, but not the special study in Europe. So that's kind of a thing we'd like to see. It's important. 1952 again, Kirkland Air Force Base. There were so many sightings in New Mexico, and especially around Kirkland, and the radiation detection at Los Alamos. UFOs were in the area, and the radiation would go up. So a special local Kirkland Air Force Base regulation was written for that. I still don't think we have all the information on the Los Alamos radiation and the sightings that go along with the radiation increase. And if we move on, February 1954, Tallahassee. Navy had a balloon that was a high altitude balloon studying cosmic rays. And they also had a chase plane that was chasing the balloon and filming the balloon. So these UFOs came up around the balloon. Now the balloon had a camera. So the camera on the balloon took pictures of the UFOs. If you want to go to the Navy catalog on my website, there's further information on this. And we've done we've enhanced the photographs from the balloon. The chase plane was filming the balloon and filmed the UFOs. The Navy took that film, and it says in Blue Book, the Navy will analyze this and return it to the files. No, it never happened. It's still missing. So FOIA did no help here. It was no help.
Wow.
So moving on, Hynek made contact with CSI New York, Civilian Saucer Intelligence of New York, in 1955, and they exchanged letters. And then Hynek was going to Europe in 56, and he stopped off up there. And Isabel said she heard a muffled knock on her door. They were all going to meet with him at this one apartment, and she opened the door, and here's Hynek with his trench coat, his collar turned up, and his hat way down on his head, so nobody would recognize
Playing the part.
him.
Oh dear.
Yeah,
well.
Nobody would recognize him, consorting with these UFO nuts. But he came in there, and he had a bunch of UFO sightings and, notes. And so Ted took those and copied them. And Isabel and the others, questioned Hynek on various material. Now, Hynek was going to England. That's why he was in New York. He was on his way to England. So he was going to get a flight to England. He was taking a copy of Project Blue Book Special Report number 14 to the English. And he was supposed to get in return a 1953-54 UK top secret document on their investigations from 52 to about 54.
And you mentioned that people were questioning Hynek's motivations, and that is something that the more I look into this, the more I'm seeing that people did really have a sense about him that he wasn't a straight shooter.
Yeah, he was, when did he decide that UFOs were important? Well, it's hard to know because every time you try to figure out a time, it turns out he did something earlier that was something that he had acted in a positive manner earlier. In 1953, he wrote an article in the Journal of Optics, which was pro-UFO. But then he would go out and, talk negatively about the evidence. And like I said last time, 1960, he let he let everybody at the hypervelocity conference know his feelings on UFOs, and actually, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He just let it all out internally in the Air Force. So it's hard to tell with him.
I mean, don't you think Close Encounters, though, was just a big propaganda piece?
What do you mean, the movie?
Yeah, the movie, yeah.
Well, the movie was, of course, it was to make some money.
But, I mean, they were using the narrative, and they were inserting a lot of things into the narrative. And I'll never forget, I watched this about 6 months ago again, because you always miss something. And as you learn more, you can see more. But I mean, listening to some of the scenes where they were talking about the cattle mutilations and let's, the anthrax over here and da 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 da, and then you've got Richard Dreyfuss running through, trying to get to, the place where the UFO was coming down, and then you've got all these crates with Lockheed on the side of it. And it's just like, what is going on here? I mean, is this just something that, again, is like furthering that narrative?
Well, I'm not sure. Spielberg, he changed up a lot of sightings in there to make them more dramatic. They're definitely, the stuff is actually hyped quite a bit, but it's like any movie. There's not much truth in it. It's not a documentary. It's a story.
Right, but it really did, and I remember seeing that, and I mean, it changed, just like the X-Files. It changed a lot of things in me. It made me question things, and perhaps it also inserted things, into my consciousness that weren't necessarily accurate. And
well, I think Hynek got that. The Hopkinsville sighting in 55 with the winged entities.
Yeah, Kelly Hopkinsville. Yep.
Yeah, so Bud Leavenworth worked with Hynek on the satellite tracking, the early satellite tracking material, and so Leavenworth gave Hynek all this information, and then Hynek got all this material from Leavenworth, and I think that's where he decided that, landings and things were real, and these occupants were real. And so he kept that to himself for, 5 years maybe. He wrote to CSI. He didn't write to anybody else. He wouldn't write to Kehoe or NICAP or even APRO. He kept it to himself, and then he got Jacques Vallée to come here from France, and then he had somebody that they could bounce stuff off each other and work on UFOs together. And so Vallée was going to the university for her advanced degree. It's just exactly when these guys decided that UFOs had something to them it's hard to put a finger on that.
Do you think, though, that they actually really cared about the subject, or were they using this to do things behind the scenes, to potentially make money, to fulfill what the intelligence community wanted them to do? And
there's no question that Hynek made money off his consulting with the Air Force. In fact, we talked to the historian there at ATIC, and he said that I'm having trouble with his name right now. I'll think of it here in a second. Anyways, he said that many times they would have meetings at Wright-Patterson and say, Hynek's consulting fee takes up a lot of money. We could hire 2 or 3 other analysts for ATIC, and the answer always came back: Headquarters Air Force does not want you to get rid of Hynek. So he said, Hynek was like untouchable. So
why?
Because he was useful. He was a well-known scientist, and his opinions were used to debunk UFOs. The whole thing was debunking UFOs. So they kept him on long after he probably served his usefulness, and Quintanilla wanted to get rid of him for a couple of years, and he finally convinced somebody that we should get rid of Hynek, but that was much later.
Well, thank you. Thanks for going into that, because this is, like I said, the more I learn about all of these people and see the behind the scenes correspondence and learn more about their backgrounds, it really is, you have to question what the motivations were at the end of the day. And I think sometimes I think
Hynek he wanted to put his kids through college.
Well, there you go.
It was a nice consulting fee on top of his professor's fee.
Interesting. And why do you think that he's become such an icon for disclosure in the UFO movement? And why are we, now doing TV shows about him and all of this?
Well, he got turned. And so, McDonald and he used to argue. McDonald, he just let Hynek have it. He visited Ballet and Hynek at Northwestern, and he banged on Hynek's desk and told him how bad he thought he had ruined the study of UFOs, and his early days were absolutely unscientific. And he told Hynek, he said, if you write a book, don't try to absolve yourself, because I will out you as to how bad you have hurt ufology. So after a while, they had a rapprochement, and things were better. But, he let Hynek have it. And I don't think Jacques ever forgave McDonald for that. I don't think he ever really liked McDonald. Going back and seeing more of these things that happened in the early days, this is kind of interesting. We have military attaches at various embassies around the world. So the attaché in Australia, 53, 54, he asked the Australians for UFO reports, and they sent him, I'd say about 50, from 51 to 54. It's interesting that that arrangement stopped just before they started having sightings at the Woomera test range, rocket test range in Australia. So if you go to Project 1947, you'll see a whole bunch of a catalog of UFO sightings at Woomera rocket base that Basterfield has gathered from the Australian archives. It's very interesting. They're almost all radar cases. It just seems that it is funny. It was cut off in '54 before the sighting started at Woomera. The attache at Uruguay, he sent reports to the Americans about from the local UFO organization. It wasn't Uruguayan Air Force, but they got the reports from the civilian UFO organization and sent them to the U.S. Air Force. Sweden, the attaché in Sweden was told to go out and investigate UFO reports in Sweden and Scandinavia. He got caught in a snowstorm one time and had to wait until the roads cleared to investigate one case. It seems like there were also cases from South Africa, which the South Africans said, yeah, we're sending cases to the British, and we're also told that the Americans are getting copies of it. So that's interesting. Brazilian. There was a Brazilian case that the U.S. military intercepted military reports of UFOs in Brazil. So that's also very interesting. Then we have there's an organization in Europe called the Air Technical Intelligence Liaison Office. So about the time Ruppelt took over, about 51 or so, they sent in a UFO report from Europe, and they said, do you guys want these things? Because nobody had told them that they were, supposed to send these things in. There was a meeting at ATIC, and they said yes, they did. So the liaison office sent them 12 more cases, which are very good cases. They selected the best cases to investigate, so they sent those over. Of course, the Korean War going on, 51 to 50, or 50 to 53, there was an Air Technical Intelligence Liaison officer there, or office there, and they sent in all kinds of UFO cases, and some of them are not in Blue Book. They're in other files. One of the most interesting files is the First Marine Air Wing. And the First Marine Air Wing, they would have what they called a weekly combat summary for the whole Korean War, what was going on. And in those summaries, there were a lot of UFO reports, and they were listed just like that. UFO reports. Barry Greenwood found that. It's just interesting because if you read the Project Blue Book cases from Korea, some of these cases are they're amplified by the Marines' comments, more details, better description. So one of the most interesting is April 14th, 1953. Off of northern Japan, there's a PBY. It's an intelligence gathering aircraft, and it's heading back for Japan. It had gone up to Korea and turned around. And on turning around, they encountered this, on the radar, they encountered this large object, and then about 10 smaller objects. And since they were full of intelligence gear, it seemed to them that the large object was directing the smaller objects. And the plane, the U.S. plane, went down to about 400 feet above the water, and these smaller objects made passes at the Air Force plane, and sometimes they would go under the plane, so just 400 feet above the water. And they said this has to be coordinated and it was at night, and there was no light, so this is very dangerous. And it seemed like the big one was coordinating the activities of the small one. And there's a UFO report in the Project Blue Book about this. And then the first Marines, they had summaries of this activity too, but they had further details about the positions of the aircraft and other things. So putting these two together, you can find it on the Project 47 website. It's very interesting when you get two items you can meld together and get more information of. It's really informative. Brad Sparks and I have been working with a former Navy fighter pilot who is also an aviation historian, and he knows about all these aircraft capabilities, what they, flights, rates of climb, all that material. And we've been looking at some old cases with him, going through them. He's very interested in pursuit cases or cases where there's an interception. So we've done about a dozen cases doing detailed analysis. This is very interesting.
And that is absolutely fascinating. And so Bruce Cornett wanted me to ask you when the encounters occurred.
What, the 1953 encounter?
1953, thank you.
Yeah. April 14th, 1953.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then he also wanted me to ask you, you had mentioned that there were Americans that got copies of the files. Who specifically?
Oh, you mean the Australian and Sweden and...
Mm-hmm.
Those all went to the attache, and then the attache would kick them back to right field. Now, the State Department was also investigating at the time, so they would send things through there. So some things wouldn't get back to right field. The State Department had, they kept some of their reports to themselves, and as we see, the Navy kept reports to themselves too. There was also something else going on in Europe at the time called Project Ringer. And it started right after the war ended. People were going around and they were looking for Germans, Nazi scientists, test pilots, all kinds of political and social and scientific information. They call people in and have them be interviewed by intelligence officers. And there were two of these organizations in Europe, two in Germany and one in Austria. So not a lot of UFO, but some UFO reports came through Project Ringer, especially returning German prisoners from the Soviet Union. these guys had seen UFOs in their prison camps, or some of them were like slave labor loaned out to local peasants as augmentation labor, and they had seen a UFO while they were in Russia. Some of these people didn't come back until the 50s. They were over there for years. So, and some of them had never heard about flying saucers or UFOs, but they did tell these stories, and so Project Ringer was another place where you would find UFO material.
So, I mean, could these people have just been guinea pigs?
What do you mean, guinea pigs?
I mean, so they're seeing these objects. I mean, could that have been? I mean, and they were in slave labor camps. Could they have been? I mean, could that have been some sort of test, military test?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Because they weren't cooperating with the Nazis, giving them information, and some of these guys were they were the local peasants. Or the peasants in Russia, they would send a prisoner out to work with, to work on these guys' farms, or to, so they weren't necessarily all slave labor camps. Anyways, it's just another aspect that we're not sure we have all the information on. So the Army had a regulation, Continental Army Command, for the United States. Within the United States, Army Command, the Continental Army Command was supposed to send UFO reports to the Army intelligence. Now, did these get to Blue Book? I'm sort of doubtful on this one. I can't find information where they did. All the Army and the Navy did cooperate with Project Blue Book, but to what extent? So probably another thing I found was in 1965. The U.S. Army Electronic Command put out a special regulation. They wanted cases from the local populace, electronic cases from Fort Monmouth and the surrounding areas. The cases were supposed to be sent to the Security Intelligence Officer, U.S. Electronics Support Command, and where are they? Who knows? One last Blue Book thing. The president of Italy's chauffeur had a close encounter with a UFO. Now, here's the thing. The president may have been in the car when this happened, but the Italians didn't tell us. They did request that the Air Force look at the case. I don't think the Air Force knew how to... the people they had didn't know how to properly translate Italian, and I don't think they got the right idea. I mean, this is an Italian general presented this case to the American Air Force, and they disrespected him. It was terrible. I read it and I said, "Oh my God, what the hell are these guys doing? Don't they understand this is important? This is an ally, a general officer of an ally," and they were quite disrespectful. The thing came down over a field near the road, and one of the things they noticed was it was hovering over his grass and just by hovering over the grass, it didn't disturb the grass at all. Came right over the car. Now there may have been electromagnetic effects. The engine may have stalled, but the Italian police that investigated the case thought that the driver had probably stalled the car himself when he saw the UFO in the excitement. So, to me, that's a rather important case. I mean, that doesn't sound like. Why would you even bring that up with the Americans if you had something like that happen to the guy that chauffeurs around the president of your country?
Absolutely. Yeah, that'll be interesting to...
That was 1963. It is in Blue Book. And the Air Force's dismal analysis of the case is also in there. It's really bad. Another one is I have personal experience with one of the witnesses. And this was on the Line Island experiment in the Pacific, on Christmas Island, which is, if there's anything that's far away from anywhere and isolated, it's Christmas Island. So they had a satellite, and they wanted to, it was a weather satellite, they wanted to take various readings from the ground and in the atmosphere and compare it to what the satellite was telling them. So the meteorologists that went to Christmas Island were Army. This is the National Academy of Sciences that was doing the testing, and NASA. So one of my friends was he went out to take an observation in the night. There's no planes in this area. Planes, airliners don't fly over Christmas Island, things like that. So he's out there at night taking an observation, and he wrote it down on his form. It's called Wayband, and he sees this light, and it's dancing around, and it keeps coming towards him, and he's thinking, "Oh, well, it's a Coast Guard plane." They were transported out there in a Coast Guard plane to the island, and he thinks it's the pilot having fun with him. So he'd flash back, and the UFO would react to the flashing and move around and flash back itself. And so he's thinking, and it keeps coming closer, and he's kind of getting. He says, this guy shouldn't be doing this. This is really unprofessional. And then he looks down where the Coast Guard plane is moored. It's a PBY, and it's there. So he recorded that he saw an unidentified object on the weather form. Well, that's when the scientists were looking the next day, they called him in, asked him what happened. So he described what happened, said, "Don't talk about it." However, by this time, everybody in the Army had heard of, on Christmas Island, all the Army guys had heard about it. And the rumor was, the scientists had said the satellite had picked it up. So, Dr. McDonald, one of the scientists on the Line Island experiment, mentioned this to Dr. McDonald. So he got the Wayband form from my colleague, and so that proves that it actually happened. Now, whether the satellite picked up the UFO is not known, but it's one of those things we don't know.
So one of the things about Christmas Island, though, from what I understand, is that they were conducting nuclear tests on and around the island.
They had conducted a nuclear test, and when they went to Christmas Island, they reopened some of the old barracks that were there and refurbished them for this test, for this experiment.
Okay, and that's all of it's so fascinating when you look at the history of certain places and again, different people that were involved in this. And so I've got to ask you, because we're getting close to show close, and I know that if we don't talk about Frank Halstead.
Right, yeah.
So give us your little bit about that. I know we don't have much time, but this is why you're coming back again and again.
I don't know if you know, are familiar with his sighting. Now, he worked at an astronomical observatory in I think it was Minnesota. So he was curator of the Darlington Observatory at the University of Minnesota. Now I think this is after he retired, but just shortly after he retired, he was on a train in the Mojave Desert, Union Pacific, in November 1955. It was November 1. They were going across the desert. He saw his wife actually saw it first. A large object over above the mountain range, and it was traveling parallel to what the train was. It was about what does it say here? I guess it's 200 feet long. Longer than any blimp at the time. So he watched this cigar-shaped thing for 4 or 5 minutes as it paced the train. Then they noticed another object, smaller, following on. So that's and its size was maybe 100 feet in diameter, and that was reported to NICAP. Now, Halstead, the McMinnville photograph. When he got out to the West Coast, he visited the editor, Bourdain, the editor of the newspaper. And Bourdain had said, when they got when they put the photograph in the newspaper, Frank Edwards got a hold of it, and he told people to send in a dime, which at the time was, worth a lot more than it is today. He told everybody to send in 10 cents for a copy of the newspaper article on the front page. So he got almost 6,000 letters, and among the letters were letters from generals and admirals who had seen UFOs describing their sighting. So when Halstead went up, the editor gave him these letters. When I went up there, he still had some of the letters, but they were not about sightings. But I copied his file on McMinnville. But Halstead used to go up there and visit the editor every once in a while. He used to ride motorcycles all over the West Coast. So that's what I'm wondering. Did Ann have any of these letters?
It's again her everything is this is a massive collection, and I am sure if anybody does, it would be her. because she was so meticulous.
I'm not sure. The editor told me he couldn't say what Halstead did with the letters. I have a few letters from Halstead, but they're pretty trivial. They're mostly to the editor, and they're, how are you, and how's everything going? It was great to see you last. There's not anything much there. I think Rod Dyke, he has the letters that Halstead wrote to NICAP because he was an advisor. So he may have letters from Halstead. I think you see where I'm going. Mm-hmm. We could probably put these together and see if there's anything significant in each collection of Halstead's material.
And I'm up for that. It is so fascinating too when you start looking at and combining, resources and things. It's just been it's incredibly important, and it's just very eye-opening to say the least.
Yes. From 1953 to 1956, the 4602nd was the main investigative unit in the Air Force for UFOs. The Project Blue Book just analyzed what these guys did, but sometimes they didn't have the 4602nd's investigations, or they investigated the case themselves. And so we found in a number of cases when you put the 4602nd and the Blue Book file together, you find a lot of interesting cases. And we found a couple of cases which the Air Force explained, but when you put the 4602nd investigation with it, it becomes unknown again. So that... Well, they did have a follow-up where they talked about your buddies, their contention that the Air Force has crashed, or the military has crashed saucers. Yeah, where is it? He said that he briefed Congress, but
yeah,
I have problems with his with this fellow, but he's a scientist. I'm not, but I don't think we're getting the whole story from him. So they did talk about that. They did talk some further about what was going on in AAITP. I didn't finish up all these possible investigations. Some of them have something to do with AAITP. Maybe we can do that another time from about post Blue Book, after Blue Book, from about 1970 onward. There's still lots of side things going on, like the Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean working with the Spanish on cases. And, of course, the Northern Tier sightings have got more information than has come out on that. And DOD in 1977 said, hey, we don't investigate cases anymore. We just record them and put them in the files. Where are those files? So maybe we, at another time, we can carry this whole line of work onward.
Absolutely. And I know that our friend Gordon Lohr, he wanted to be here tonight, and I'm still getting my production skills, obviously, going on. And when I can figure out how to, not be too distracted by adding multiple people, that could be the seventh sign of the apocalypse right there. But it would be fun to have a conversation with both you and Gordon, and then Barry again, and maybe we can talk to Keith Chester and just get some of these important dialogues going on, because each of us has an area that we specialize in, and you've got so much knowledge in many different areas, but I think it's very important to combine forces. And thank you for all of the information that you have given us. And so basically, I think you just need to plan on one Friday a month. You're coming on the show. Sure,
that'd be fine.
Okay, good. Because I know everybody in chat loves it, and I think it gives us places to go with our research. So we're not just looking at, the
Which
tic
is my
tac, and that's important, because we get, with the, like I mentioned earlier, and like I always mention, we get so caught up in the, the sexiness of Skinwalker Ranch, or the, the allure of, following the Tic Tac or Elizondo and all of these things that a lot of times we're getting taken away from what we really need to be focusing on, which is really, I think.
Right. Now Elizondo has given some hints that I would like to pass on that are in the subject that we had tonight, side investigations or other investigations. He's given some hints on that, and it's something that needs to be taken. He doesn't give much information.
Does he know much information,
but
though?
He gives little hints every once in a while.
Do you think he actually knows? Or is he just a, spokesperson, how much does it
I don't know, but... he knows something, and he went to South America here during those programs, so he brought back some information from down there that's very interesting. So,
well, it would be interesting to find out again that he's kind of following the Bigelow path of all of that. So it remains to be seen, but it's all fascinating. So thank you for another wonderful night, and I will get you on again. So just plan on that. And I want to thank everybody for listening to the show next week. I have a certain person that is in chat tonight, Stephen, who is going to be on. I'm excited about that because Stephen has been, if you notice in chat, he's so knowledgeable about things. And so I cannot wait to get him on the show. And then Jan back again, and Gordon. And again, thank you so much for supporting UFO Classified. Jan, thank you for everything. I hope you guys have a wonderful night. Thanks, Mario. You guys take care, and we will catch you soon. Thanks, Jan.
Okay. Bye now.
So my skeptical mind, and that's just who I am. My skeptical mind goes to, well, yeah, of course, you've got this guy over here that's logical and reasonable, and you got this guy over here that's wearing a tinfoil hat. Of course the tinfoil hat guy's going to see a lot of stuff, right? He's like imagining it, or he's watched one too many sci-fi movies.
I want to put it to use to help us frame hypotheses for UFO propulsion, power, stealth, weaponry.
Everything that we experience is very positive.
Sometimes the field of ufology has a short memory span.
We didn't know anything about the $22 million back then. We just kind of thought, well, this is, and I think that was the reason why they were looking for military-type people, because in the military, you work with whatever you got, no matter what the situation is, and you just kind of adapt and overcome.
What are you going to do with all this? You can't even take care of your own files and get them put into the current system, but yet you want to go collect other people's things. So what are you going to do with it? Who are you giving all this to?
It just really struck me about how the common thread seemed to be deception, but deception of a human nature. So that's what I started thinking, who would these folks be? I mean, then I started thinking about the intelligence agencies, what role they could play, and what would be their motivations for getting involved in ufology.
me. I'm not saying that because the gimbal is not a rotating flying saucer, that means that all the UFOs are false. Not at all. All I'm doing is I'm looking at this one case, these individual cases, and seeing if there's an explanation for those. So try to, if I could ask people out there listening, don't think that I'm trying to attack your entire beliefs about these things.